Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. So speaking of trust and Google, the Bright Local Business Discovery and Trust Report came out this week, which was a survey of about 1,100 U.S. adults. It was the second such survey Bright Local has done. They did one in 2021, and they did one again this year. The findings are pretty consistent with 2021, although there's some incremental differences. It's basically an inquiry about where are you looking for local business information, how often are you doing it, do you see any spam or errors, and what kinds of things do you look for in a essentially GBP listing to trust a business. So there's a bunch of issues kind of captured by the survey, and it doesn't say anything really surprising. They did throw in sort of social discovery for local businesses, which is, I think, an interesting area. But what they found basically was that the top 3 most trusted sources for local business discovery, local search, however you want to describe it, are Google, Google Maps, and the business website. And then Yelp is in there and the BBB. In the social arena, it's Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, then TikTok, and then Twitter. And what's interesting is that Facebook is the most, I think they said Facebook is the most used. Let me find it. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, folks. Facebook is the most used, but also the least trusted social channel for business discovery. That's kind of strange and interesting, but it reflects what we increasingly see in the broader marketplace, which is people who are using these tools because they must or feel compelled to and have a very ambivalent relationship with those tools. This survey said Google was the most trusted by 66%, most trusted / widely used by 66% of their respondents. The question was, which platforms do consumers trust, or do you trust to find information about local businesses? 66% Google. Then it drops down with Google Maps to 45% and business websites, and then Facebook. Actually, Facebook comes before Yelp, and then the BBB. Last week, I think we talked about this survey that was done by an organization called Data for Progress, where people overwhelmingly used Google. They used it regularly, but they didn't trust it. 60% of people had strong concerns about privacy with Google, and they thought that half the audience thought that ads were useless. So it's this situation where people are using these tools, but they don't necessarily feel completely comfortable with them. In this survey, there really isn't as much evidence of that ambivalence, except if you sort of read between the lines, where some amount of people are sort of bleeding off into social. But it's also interesting that we've heard and talked so much about TikTok in all of this as sort of siphoning off Gen Z users. But in this survey, and I don't know what the demographic breakdown was here, in this survey, TikTok is really 4th in the social hierarchy, and YouTube, another Google property, is number 2. So Google is getting the benefit of local discovery and ad impressions over on YouTube when people are doing local searches, which I think is interesting. That's not well understood, that behavior. I think it's YouTube is the number 2 search engine. We all know that, but the way in which people interact with YouTube for local is not a well studied or well understood topic. Briefly,
I think part of that, though, is because as you look at these numbers, which sources of business information do consumers trust, they basically are telling Bright Local which sources they use. 66% trust Google, 45%.
Yes,
trust Google
I think
Maps,
that's right. I think that's a good
36% trust the website. In other words, people don't use those other sources. 32% trust Facebook. 32%
I think that's right.
And I think the numbers for social are somewhere for YouTube, and others are somewhat lower than that. The other point I would make here is that given that we don't know the demographics, I think that this is going to change based on income and based on countries surveyed. We don't even know which countries they surveyed here,
U.S.
but
U.S.
oh,
U.S.
just
It's
US. Well, to
yeah.
me, then I would like to see the breakdown of phone ownership in the cohort, because if I, any research I've done in terms of actual conversions in local businesses, we see Apple converting more users than either Facebook or Yelp, but we don't see it showing up in these numbers. Now, I do think that I think it would, uh, our research on numbers of Apple Maps users sort of correlates with their trust numbers, that twice as many people trust Google Maps as Apple Maps. I think that's true. But I don't think at the lower end
Well,
of this, Facebook, Yelp, or they don't show Apple. I think
so,
Apple is really
so
in
that's
that
not
category.
so that's not exactly the question, at least as reflected in the survey write up with respect to maps. So the question was, what they published was exclusive to Apple users. They asked Apple users, iPhone and um, Mac users. It's not just iPhone users. Which Maps app do you prefer? Which is a sort of a trust question, but not exactly. We it sort of assumes trust as a part of the preference. And Apple Map, Google, as you just said, Google had a 2-to-1 advantage, and then there was like an interesting other group that was about 15% that it's undefined. What are they using for Maps access? But this is a search that could be Yelp. I mean, it's a search use case. It's not a navigation use case. And I think if the question were about navigation, we might see some slightly different numbers. But just to sort of
Well, the
round out
Apple
the rest,
penetration is even Apple Maps penetration is still low, relatively
yes,
speaking, as we've seen, even on amongst dedicated Mac iPhone users. It doesn't have a great desktop app. It has an app, but it's not that easy to likely to be
yeah.
used. So it's only used on the iPhone, and so the device profile is different. But it's an area where I see more conversions so than I do for Yelp or Facebook. So and that's
So
not reflected
so
here.
there was a lot of stuff in the survey. Just I'll make a couple more points. If you're interested in learning more, a lot of it is about what kinds of listings inaccuracy are people seeing? What categories does it fall into? What do people want to see from business listings, and when do they lose trust in business listings? The short version of that is they want to see correct information. They want to see a lot of positive reviews. When they don't see those things, they lose trust. It's pretty intuitive. But one of the interesting areas that they explored was fake listings. They didn't really talk about how they explained that to the audience, what a fake listing was. Um, but what the survey found was that 51% are seeing fake listings once or twice a year, and about almost a quarter, 23%, are seeing them monthly. Now, how do people know they're fake listings? We don't know the answer to that, but I think it's interesting. It may also reflect this growing perception that there is fraud, review fraud, and bogus information and scams that people are sort of increasingly aware of based on media coverage and anecdotal information. And that may be what these numbers sort of directionally reflect more than an actual understanding of when they're seeing a fake listing.
Yeah, I mean, people want accurate business listings. And I always get annoyed when I understand that if you go to Google and you look up a business and it's inaccurate, either the opening hours or the phone number, you always wonder what the business was thinking and why aren't they, more, you know, why aren't they playing a better game? So those numbers make sense to me, just based on my anecdotal experience, that you got to have accurate listings on Google primarily, but ideally every place mentioned here as well as a few
Yep.
others.
Yeah, for
What
sure.
I do
Which
wonder
is
is how social media like YouTube is used for business discovery.
well,
Maybe
this
it's
is
just not
this is
researched, but I understand how
yeah.
TikTok is used in that regard. But what about
Well,
YouTube?
Well, but this is an interesting question that maybe is a follow up for us or somebody to explore. Is like, how are people actually interacting with YouTube? If it's the second most commonly used social media platform, we can debate whether that's valid categorization at this point, but it's the second most used social media platform for local business discovery. What does that actually mean? Are they looking for, are they looking in their area for HVAC installers and they just watch videos for those that happen to show up? Are they looking for specific businesses? Are they doing local searches as they would on Google? Plumber in Bethesda, Maryland, that kind of thing. I mean, it's a blind spot, I think, in the local SEO world. Nobody really has
I
explored
would
that or
contend it's
understood
not
it.
so much a blind spot as it is a very low volume opportunity. That, in other words, I mean, once you get to Yelp and Facebook, the opportunity is very low. I mean, it's 5% of Google
Well,
or
there is
less,
there is
and
the
so if something is less than Facebook and Yelp, that means it's 1 or 2%, right? It's very low. It's like hard to rationalize an
except
ROI in that
except
kind of
there's
thing.
the Will Scott Barnacle SEO, if he's the originator of that term, or Shotland, one of the two. There is the phenomena of the indexing of the YouTube video in the Google SERP, but that's a question perhaps for a different day.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.